Let's hone in on this. Schools closed under the lockdown pose quite unique challenges for children with special needs who risk regressing. Now, the vulnerable children require extra care that their families may not necessarily be sufficiently equipped to provide. As it stands, it's still not clear when schools for children with special needs, in fact, will open, and how can parents and caregivers, therefore, support these children during this lockdown period. To speak to us on this issue and its complexities, I'm now joined by educational psychologist Dr. Tshepiso Matentjie. Doc, thanks very much for your time. Once again, welcome to the AM Report. It really is a difficult position to be in as a parent who has to take care of someone with special needs. Outside of the anxiety that the lockdown brings, it also presents very unique challenges insofar as learning and teaching can take place. Perhaps let's start with the emotional needs. I mean, how best can parents provide for that as they prepare their children to be in a position where they can learn during this period?
Yeah. Good morning to you, Ayan, and to your listeners at home, and thank you for inviting me onto the program. Yes, we know that the COVID-19 has had really, especially the lockdown as well as the measures that were put in place to try and mitigate against the spread of the virus. They've put a lot of pressure on parents, especially parents who are having children with special needs. And for them, particularly in under-resourced, poverty-stricken communities, there is already a shortage in terms of the type of support they would require. There is already a shortage in terms of the professionals that they would require to provide support to them and to their kids, as well as limited access to technology. And then being able to provide essential stimulation for the child will require that they have a certain financial resources. So that would add to the pressure in terms of the emotional and the mental stress that the parents and consequently the child would be put under during the lockdown. And as we're looking at children returning to school because of the special needs kids, those schools are not necessarily yet going to open. It's a concern about how they can continue participating in learning and not regress or lag behind in terms of their educational development.
Yeah, that's right, especially because in some instances, it almost feels like the basic education department makes reference to children with special needs as an afterthought, you know, a by-the-way type commentary. I mean, do you get that sense too, that there isn't enough time taken to specifically think things through insofar as the plight of children with special needs is concerned?
Well, I wouldn't want to come out and say that it's the way that the government is approaching learners with special needs is as an afterthought. However, the level of resources that are available in black communities, in impoverished and in rural communities are very scarce. You're not going to find a psychologist like me in the rural areas servicing schools in those areas, because after all, people are not going to be able to afford an educational psychologist in that place. But also, I would not be able to sustain my business there. So it's not just the government, it's also just the system of a multidisciplinary community in terms of how we show up in under-resourced communities. The other part is that where kids are able to go to a specific center to get stimulation, the parents would be involved. Now, we also have a challenge of parents who are not necessarily actively involved or even taking into consideration the fact that it's not just about placing your child there. You need to show up. There are certain activities that you need to do. Now, granted, when we were going into the lockdown, teachers were given scopes in terms of what they need to do to be able to provide support and continued learning during the lockdown to parents and therefore to children. Now, when you have special needs, typically based on the disability, you would have a parallel curriculum that you're offering, meaning that if I am learning Braille while the other kids are learning something else, my parallel curriculum will be teaching me how to learn in Braille. If I am blind and I'm learning how to navigate my spaces, then I would be learning about mobility practices. Those types of activities would be exposed to the parents so that they know how to facilitate it. But in under-resourced and impoverished communities, we know that will be limited in terms of how our parents is able to implement them. It does not necessarily mean that with government it's an afterthought. It just means that us as a team, as a country, we are not necessarily prioritizing the needs of kids with coming from impoverished communities. We are not even locating ourselves there. And I'm one of those people in terms of my profession where we are not servicing those communities communities adequately like we should.
Yeah, and it's sort of a double whammy because typically those are the same communities that wouldn't have access to something like technology, which would help to augment some of those requirements. But let's speak about technology and what it can do for children with special needs in any case.
Yes.
Already a lot of parents are struggling to get other children perhaps who don't have these difficulties to sit down and be independent during this period. I imagine the difficulties are compounded for children with special needs in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. But then let's look at what we mean by technology. Understand that technology for different learning aspects means different things. For other people, technology simply means being able to get a pen and a paper. And for somebody who is struggling to read and they need a large print, they just need somebody to be able to, highlight or enlarge whatever it is that they're supposed to be reading. For a child with Braille, somebody being able to have the machine that embosses the Braille letters. So technology varies depending on the learning requirements of a child. For other kids, technology, we might think that it's about the iPad and the computer and somebody being able to give you a lesson via Skype. But when you have a special needs, it depends on what the needs are, and they would have been identified at school. And the process of identifying it requires, as I said, a multidisciplinary team. A psychologist, a speech therapist, might be a neurologist, an occupational therapist, as well as the teacher, as well as a remedial teacher. And all of those people would have informed the parents about the different technologies that the child would require during the period of the lockdown. But in under-resourced communities, access to those would be limited. And then it would be about thinking outside of the box. So if we do not have this, what else can we use? If we cannot provide you with this one, what alternatives can be? The key thing is about facilitating learning for their child, whatever their learning requirements is. So let's not just limit it to computers and Skype and those types of programs. Technology is far much wider than it would be for a child with special needs.
It's a good point. Speak to us then about, how some of the lockdown regulations, such as social distancing, might impact a child with special needs and their ability to learn during this time. I mean, increasingly we warned against physical contact. However, for many children, this is an integral part of their learning process. How can parents who find themselves in that particular position try negotiate those particular challenges?
What you're raising, Ayanda, is such a sensitive point, especially because us as a people, when we've got families that have children with special needs, we tend not to be so actively involved in sending our kids there anyway to interact with those kids. We want to protect them if a child has got cerebral palsy because we think, it will shock my child, it will traumatize them. So our own norms as society actually is part of what might be amplifying the social isolation. So the social distancing comes with it, the isolation that a child with special needs might be suffering because of they might not be engaging with peer groups in the same way that a developing child, a typical developing child might be exposed to. However, all families with children are facing common pressures and stresses about how do I protect my child when they return to school, because all children thrive from unstructured play, from peer interaction, from just engaging with their peers without worrying about X, Y, and Z regarding health and hygiene. And all parents are having those types of anxiety, irrespective of the disability. We are also aware that for children with special needs, exposing them also to other kids might also make them vulnerable to exploitation, to bullying. So it might be a double-edged sword for them. I mean that on the one hand, it's a protective factor because at least they're not being exposed in environments where they can be taken advantage of. But they're also missing out on the play. Then it's about how the family, during the weekends, during the school holidays, how have they been managing with the lack of social interaction? Because actually for a lot of children with special needs, that's their reality. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a detrimental effect completely, but it just has to do with how the family manages as well during school holidays when there are no other kids, when there's no school and your child's special needs is based at home. How do you provide the social interaction and how do you ensure that they're protected, even as now within the COVID-19 we are wanting to have them maintain hygiene practices adequately to stop the spread of the virus.
Right. Now the focus has largely been on the children themselves who have some kind of special need, but of course, this moment is also putting an incredible amount of strain on the parents. Many will be looking for a way to remain emotionally resilient during this time. And yet again, the pandemic doesn't really allow for that to happen insofar as face-to-face contact is concerned. How best then do parents in that position do that, stay strong essentially for their children in these already trying times?
Yes. Another valid point. And for parents, the motto is that if you take care of yourself, your emotional, your mental, your physical, your psychological health, you are better placed to provide the support to your child. If you are not taking care of yourself, you are actually going to burn out, because you're even going to miss out certain things that your child is showing you that, hey, I'm under duress, I'm not okay, I'm not coping, I need you to attend to an additional need that has just emerged recently. So it's important as parents that you look at taking care of yourself. That does not mean as you're busy taking care of yourself, you should neglect your child. It also does mean, on the other hand, that if you are not coping, reach out to somebody, be there so that they can also show up for you. Know who are the people that can provide a support network for you. Because as you establish those, and granted, for a lot of parents when they have special needs, even in impoverished communities, and I've worked in the rural area in Limpopo, where parents actually do understand that they have a community of support with other parents who are having children with similar disabilities, it's important that you tap into that network. A WhatsApp, a please call me, and even just a phone call might help. And in terms of contacting the teachers as well as the doctors in the community, it's important that you establish that, because if you are okay, you're going to be in a better position to help your child. And then, importantly, as you are observing how your child is doing, their mental health becomes important. Understand that your child might be indicating that they are not coping in ways that you as a parent might think, oh, so this child is just acting out, they are being insolent, when in fact they are actually crying out for help and something else is happening to them. So stay attuned, have conversations with them, touch base with them regularly, so that you can track how they are doing and you can respond timelessly when they have a need that they need to be addressed.
All definitely worth noting and so valuable. Thank you very much for your time. Certainly appreciate it.